On Christmas Eve, I stepped into my parents' living room and froze. Right there, above the fireplace, was a massive custom-framed family portrait. My dad, my mom, and my brother Elijah all smiling brightly. But my face was completely cropped out, erased like I never existed. Nobody said a word. The next morning, I handed my parents a thick manila envelope and quietly told them not to open it. Of course, they ripped it open anyway. Within seconds, my mom was sobbing uncontrollably, and my dad's face drained of all color. Before I tell you exactly what was in that envelope and how it brought their entire fake empire crashing down, please let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. I always love seeing where my audience is from. Grab a warm cup of coffee, sit back, and let me tell you the whole story. I stood in the entryway of the house I grew up in, stomping the December snow off my boots. The smell of roasted rosemary, garlic, and expensive pine candles filled the air. It was supposed to be the perfect holiday scene. My mother always went out of her way to make our home look like something out of a lifestyle magazine. Every garland was perfectly draped, every light bulb perfectly spaced. I hung my heavy winter coat on the rack, took a deep breath, and walked into the living room. That was when I saw it. Directly above the stone fireplace, taking up almost half the wall, was a massive new photograph. It was glossy, professionally lit, and set in a heavy mahogany frame. My mother was sitting on a velvet chair wearing her signature pearls, her hair perfectly styled. My father stood behind her, wearing that stiff, practiced smile he reserved for country club dinners and golf course selfies. And right next to them, taking up the most space, was my younger brother, Elijah. He was wearing a tailored suit that probably cost more than my first car, flashing a wide, arrogant grin. It was a beautiful picture. The only problem was that I wasn't in it. I didn't just miss picture day. I knew exactly when this photo was taken. It was at my cousin's wedding 4 months ago. I remembered standing right next to Elijah. I remembered my mom telling me to stand up straight. But looking at the frame now, the space where I had stood was seamlessly edited. It wasn't a sloppy crop. It was a meticulous, professional Photoshop job. They had paid someone good money to digitally erase me from our family history. I stood there staring at it. 5 seconds passed, then 10. A strange ringing noise started in my ears. I expected to feel sad. I expected to feel that familiar, tight ache in my chest that I had carried around since childhood. But I didn't. Instead, a cold, heavy calmness washed over me. "Dinner is almost ready," my mom called out from the kitchen. Her voice was light, breezy, completely normal. I walked into the kitchen. My mom was pulling a tray of roasted vegetables from the oven. My dad was pouring himself a glass of expensive red wine. Elijah was leaning against the marble island, scrolling through his phone. Not a single one of them looked at me with guilt. Not one of them even brought up the giant missing elephant in the living room. They just expected me to ignore it. They expected me to swallow my pride and play the role of the quiet, invisible son, just like I always did. I slid my hand into the inner pocket of my jacket. My fingers brushed against the thick, heavy paper of a manila envelope. I had brought it with me tonight, unsure of exactly when I was going to hand it over. Part of me, the naive, foolish part of me that still desperately wanted a family, had thought about keeping it hidden. I had thought about giving them one last chance to just be normal parents. But seeing that photograph changed everything. They didn't just forget me. They strategically removed me, like I was a bad brand partnership they were trying to scrub from their public image. I kept my hand in my pocket and forced a polite smile. I sat through the agonizing dinner. I listened to my dad brag about his investments. I listened to my mom praise Elijah's glowing skin and his brand new designer watch. I ate my food, drank my water, and watched them perform their perfect little play. The envelope stayed in my pocket all night. I didn't hand it to them then. I wanted them to enjoy their last peaceful night. Because tomorrow morning, when the sun came up and the presents were opened, I was going to drop a bomb that would shatter their reality forever. To understand why I had that envelope, and why I was ready to burn my own family down to the ground, we have to rewind. We have to go back 3 months to a cramped office building downtown, where a single piece of paper from the government finally woke me up from a lifetime of lies. 3 months before that Christmas Eve, my life was actually going pretty well. I was 28 years old, working 50 hours a week as a senior logistics manager. I wasn't rich by any means, but I made a solid salary. I lived modestly, drove a used sedan, and saved every extra dollar I could. I was finally ready to buy my first home. It wasn't going to be a mansion, just a small 2-bedroom condo on the edge of the city. I remember sitting in the fluorescent-lit office of my mortgage broker, a guy named Dave. I had all my paperwork neatly organized in a green folder. 2 years of tax returns, pay stubs, bank statements. I was proud of my financial discipline. I handed the folder to Dave with a confident smile. Dave typed a few things into his computer, clicked his mouse, and waited. A minute later, his brow furrowed. He leaned closer to the monitor, his eyes narrowing. "Matthew," he said slowly, looking over his glasses at me, "is there something you forgot to disclose on your application?" "No," I replied, suddenly feeling a knot form in my stomach. "I included everything. My car is paid off. I have 0 credit card debt, and my student loans are cleared." Dave turned the monitor around so I could see it. "Then you need to explain this. Your credit report is showing a massive red flag. You have an active tax lien from the IRS for unpaid property taxes. And it's not a small amount. We're talking tens of thousands of dollars." I stared at the screen. The words blurred together. "That's impossible," I stammered. "I rent an apartment. I don't own any property. There has to be a mistake. Someone must have stolen my identity." Dave printed out the report and slid it across the desk. "It's attached to your social security number. The property is located in Old Briar. Does that ring a bell?" My heart stopped. Old Briar. That was the affluent neighborhood where my grandfather used to live before he passed away. I left the bank feeling like the ground had vanished beneath my feet. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely unlock my car door. As soon as I got inside, I dialed my best friend, Chloe. She was a real estate agent and knew how to navigate public property records better than anyone I knew. "Chloe, I need a huge favor," I said, my voice tight. I explained the situation to her, reading the address off the paper Dave had given me. "Give me 10 minutes, she said. Those 10 minutes sitting in the bank parking lot felt like a decade. My mind raced. Was it a clerical error? Did my grandfather have some unresolved debt that somehow got attached to my name? Finally, my phone buzzed. "Matt," Chloe said, her voice unusually serious. "I pulled the deed history for the Old Briar property. It's a multi-unit rental complex now, and you are the sole owner. The title was transferred entirely to your name 10 years ago, right after your grandfather's funeral." Couldn't breathe. "I own a rental complex? Chloe, I've never seen a dime of rent in my life. I don't pay the taxes on it. I don't manage it. Who is managing it?" I heard her typing rapidly on her keyboard. "According to the public filings, the property is being managed by a registered LLC. The primary agents on the LLC are Robert and Sarah. My parents." I dropped the phone into my lap. The air in the car suddenly felt suffocating. For 10 years, my parents had been operating a lucrative rental property in one of the most expensive zip codes in the state. A property that legally belonged to me. They were collecting the rent, living large, and apparently completely ignoring the property taxes under my name, letting the IRS put a lien on my future. I closed my eyes, and suddenly, a memory hit me like a physical punch to the gut. A memory from exactly 10 years ago. The puzzle pieces were violently snapping together, and the picture they formed made me want to throw up. I was 18 years old when my grandfather passed away. He was the only person in my family who ever actually saw me. While my parents were busy parading Elijah around, signing him up for elite sports camps and private tutors, my grandfather would sit with me on his porch. He taught me how to play chess. He asked me about my favorite books. When he died, it broke me. I remember the day of his funeral vividly. It was raining, a cold, miserable autumn drizzle. I was sitting in the back of a black town car, wearing a cheap, ill-fitting suit, staring out the window at the wet pavement. My chest felt hollow. When we got back to our house after the burial, the place was full of distant relatives eating catered sandwiches and drinking weak coffee. I retreated to the kitchen to get away from the noise. I was sitting at the island, staring blankly at a glass of water, when my dad walked in. He was followed by my Uncle Dylan, a guy who always wore expensive cologne and thought he was the smartest guy in any room. My dad placed a thick stack of papers on the kitchen counter in front of me. He patted my shoulder, a rare gesture of affection that instantly made me lower my guard. "I know it's a tough day, buddy," my dad said, his voice soft and solemn. "But we have a lot of ugly administrative stuff to handle. Grandpa's estate is a mess. There are a lot of debts, hospital bills, and funeral expenses that need to be cleared." Uncle Dylan handed me a heavy black pen. "Your grandfather left you a little bit of cash to help with your first car, Matt. But the state requires a bunch of legal sign-offs from all immediate family members to process the estate and settle his debts. Your mom and dad have already signed their parts. We just need your signature on these releases so we can get the funeral home paid." I was 18. I was grieving the only person who cared about me. I trusted my father. I trusted my uncle. I didn't read a single word of those documents. I just took the pen and signed my name where the little yellow sticky notes told me to, page after page. Sitting in my car 10 years later, clutching the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white, the truth finally washed over me. Those weren't release forms for hospital bills. I had signed a comprehensive power of attorney. I had signed away my rights to manage my own inheritance. I had given my parents full legal control to operate the property, collect the income, and make financial decisions on my behalf. They had used my grief as a weapon to blindfold me while they robbed me blind. A heavy, dark anger started to boil in the pit of my stomach. It wasn't just a quick flash of madness. It was a deep, historical rage. Because finding out they stole a house from me was terrible, but realizing what they did with that money over the next 10 years was what truly broke my heart. The anger wasn't just about the money. It was about the excruciating contrast of how we lived. It was about the lies they told me straight to my face while they were secretly cashing my checks. 2 months after the funeral, I was sitting at that exact same kitchen island. I had just received my acceptance letter to a top-tier state university. I had worked my fingers to the bone in high school. I studied late into the night, kept my grades flawless, and stayed out of trouble. I needed a little help to cover the gap between my partial scholarship and the tuition costs. I thought we had a college fund. I slid the financial aid forms across the counter to my dad. "Dad, I need you and Mom to co-sign on this loan, and maybe help me with the first semester's room and board. I'll pay you back as soon as I graduate. I promise." My dad didn't even pick up the paper. He just sighed, rubbing his temples like I was giving him a massive headache. "Matthew, you have to be realistic," he said, using his best disappointed parent voice. "Things are incredibly tight right now. The economy is rough. We are drowning in expenses. We don't have a college fund sitting around for you. You're a smart kid, you need to figure this out on your own. Maybe defer a year and work at the hardware store." I felt a lump form in my throat, but I nodded. I didn't argue. I packed my bags, moved out, and crashed on the couch of my buddy, Luke. I took out high-interest private loans. I worked 3 jobs. I flipped burgers until 2 a.m., woke up at 6 a.m. to clean library floors, and went to class in between. I ate instant noodles so often that the smell of them still makes me nauseous today. While I was doing that, my parents were telling me they were broke. But exactly 2 months after my dad told me they had no money, it was Elijah's 18th birthday. I remember coming home for a quick weekend visit to do my laundry because I couldn't afford the laundromat. I walked up the driveway and stopped dead in my tracks. Sitting perfectly parked in front of our garage was a brand new, pristine white Porsche. It had a massive red bow slapped on the hood. My parents were standing on the lawn holding champagne glasses. Elijah was jumping up and down, screaming, hugging my mom, high-fiving my dad. "You guys are the best parents in the entire world," Elijah yelled, dangling the shiny keys in the air. I stood by the trash cans, holding a plastic laundry basket full of cheap, faded t-shirts. My dad caught my eye. He didn't look embarrassed. He just offered a weak shrug and mouthed, "We got a good deal on a lease." A lease, right? Over the next 10 years, while I was agonizing over grocery bills, they were taking trips to Tuscany. While I couldn't afford a plane ticket home for Thanksgiving, my mom was posting photos of her new designer handbags, raving about how blessed she was. Elijah failed out of 2 different colleges, and they happily paid his rent in the city while he tried to launch a useless art collective. They built an entire empire of luxury, privilege, and favoritism. And they built it using the bricks of my stolen inheritance. Sitting in my car outside the bank, wiping a tear of pure rage from my cheek, the sad, lonely kid inside me finally died. I didn't want their love anymore. I didn't want their approval. I wanted justice. I put my car in drive and pulled out of the parking lot. I wasn't going to confront them. Not yet. If I was going to war against my own blood, I needed ammunition. And I knew exactly where to find it. I took the rest of the day off work and drove straight to Old Briar. It was a 40-minute drive from my apartment, but it felt like entering a different dimension. The streets were lined with massive oak trees and manicured lawns. I pulled up to the address Chloe had given me. It wasn't just a house. It was a beautifully maintained triplex. 3 separate, luxury rental units. The brickwork was immaculate. The windows were large and modern. My grandfather had bought this place decades ago for pennies, and now it was a gold mine. I parked down the street and walked up to the front unit. I didn't have a plan. I just needed to see it with my own eyes. As I stood on the sidewalk staring at the front door, an older woman stepped out onto the porch carrying a watering can. She had kind eyes and silver hair pulled into a messy bun. "Can I help you, young man?" she asked, looking at me curiously. "Hi," I said, forcing a friendly, relaxed smile. "I'm sorry to bother you. I'm actually a contractor, just doing some exterior evaluations for the neighborhood association. Beautiful place you have here." She smiled warmly and walked down the steps. "Oh, thank you. I've lived in this unit for almost 9 years. It's a lovely area. Though, to be honest, it's getting harder to afford." I casually leaned against the wrought iron fence. "Yeah, the market is crazy right now. Management companies are hiking prices everywhere." She let out a frustrated sigh. "Tell me about it. My landlord, Robert, just raised my rent by another $300 a month. Said the property taxes were going up and he couldn't absorb the cost." My jaw tightened, but I kept my smile locked in place. "That's rough. Robert, you said? Does he use a management portal for payments? Usually, those corporate portals charge extra fees." "Oh, no." She waved her hand dismissively. "Robert is very old school. No portals. He makes all 3 of us tenants wire the rent directly into his personal checking account on the 1st of every month. Says it cuts out the middleman. Between the 3 units, he must be pulling in a fortune. But getting him to send a plumber takes an act of Congress." I felt a cold rush of adrenaline. He wasn't even using a business account. He was routing the rent directly into his personal pockets to fund his lifestyle, completely bypassing any corporate accounting that might flag the IRS. It was sloppy. It was arrogant. He truly believed he would never get caught because he thought I was too stupid to ever look. "Well, I hope he fixes that plumbing for you soon," I said politely, backing away. "Have a great day, ma'am." "You too, dear," she called out. I walked back to my car, my mind racing. I had a witness. I had proof of the cash flow. But I needed to know exactly how deep the betrayal went in my family. I needed to know who else knew. A few nights later, I met my cousin Wyatt at a loud, dimly lit sports bar downtown. Wyatt was Uncle Dylan's son. Growing up, Wyatt and I were somewhat close. We used to hide in the basement and play video games while the adults argued upstairs during Thanksgiving. If there was anyone in the family I thought I could trust, it was him. We ordered 2 beers. I played it cool for the first hour, talking about sports and his new girlfriend. But after the second round, I decided to test the waters. I leaned in over the sticky wooden table, lowering my voice. "Hey man, can I ask you something weird?" I said, swirling the amber liquid in my glass. "Did your dad ever mention anything about Grandpa's old property? The one in Old Briar?" Wyatt froze. His eyes darted to his beer, and his shoulders tensed. It was a micro-expression, but I caught it. Old Briar? No. I thought they sold that place years ago to pay off Grandpa's medical debt. Why? Just something came up on a background check at work. I lied smoothly. Just weird administrative stuff. Probably nothing. Yeah, definitely nothing, Wyatt said quickly, taking a massive gulp of his beer. He immediately changed the subject back to football. I went home that night feeling uneasy. 2 days later, my phone rang. It was my dad. He rarely called me unless he needed me to fix his computer. I hit accept and put the phone to my ear. "Matthew, my boy," my dad said. His voice was overly cheerful, but there was a sharp, metallic edge underneath it. "How are things? Working hard? Any promotion on the horizon?" "Always working hard," I replied flatly. "Good, good. Listen." He paused, and I could hear the sound of him pacing on his hardwood floor. "Wyatt mentioned he saw you the other night. Said you were asking some confused questions about your grandfather's old estate." My blood ran cold. Wyatt had sold me out. He probably called his dad Uncle Dylan the second I left the bar, and Dylan called my father. The entire family network was operating against me. "I was just making conversation, Dad," I said, keeping my voice utterly devoid of emotion. "Right. Well, listen carefully to me, Matt." His voice dropped, losing all the fake cheerfulness. It became cold, authoritative, and distinctly threatening. "Don't go digging into things you don't understand. The estate was settled legally 10 years ago. Looking into closed files only causes unnecessary headaches for the family. You focus on your little logistics job and leave the complicated financial matters to the adults." "Understood." He didn't wait for an answer. He hung up. I pulled the phone away from my ear and stared at the screen. He was scared. He was trying to intimidate me into backing down. But he fundamentally misunderstood who he was dealing with. I wasn't the terrified, grieving 18-year-old kid anymore. I was a man who had built his entire life from scratch with zero help. I didn't cower. I didn't cry. I opened my laptop, typed "aggressive real estate litigation lawyer" into the search bar, and made a phone call that would change my life. His name was Carter. He worked in a sleek, glass-walled office building, wearing a sharp suit and a no-nonsense expression. Carter usually handled messy divorce and custody battles for high-net-worth clients, but Chloe promised me he knew real estate fraud inside and out. He was the kind of guy who didn't smile much, which was exactly what I wanted. I sat across from him in his office, sliding my IRS notice, the property records, and a transcript of the conversation I had with the tenant across his desk. Carter put on his reading glasses and flipped through the documents in silence. For 10 straight minutes, the only sound in the room was the ticking of his wall clock and the rustling of paper. Finally, he took his glasses off and looked at me. "Your parents are incredibly brazen, Matthew," Carter said, his voice a low rumble. "And surprisingly stupid." "Explain it to me," I said, leaning forward. Carter pulled up a document on his computer screen and turned it toward me. "I pulled the original will your grandfather filed with the county. It explicitly states that the Old Briar property is to be left to you, and you alone. No trusts, no executors, full direct transfer upon his death." "But I signed a power of attorney," I argued, feeling a sickening wave of guilt for my past stupidity. "You did," Carter nodded, "and that gave them the legal right to manage the property. But it did not give them the right to misappropriate the income. A power of attorney legally binds the agent, your parents, to act strictly in the best financial interest of the principal you. By funneling the rent into their personal accounts, failing to pay the property taxes in your name, and using the funds for luxury personal expenses, they have committed textbook fiduciary fraud. grand theft, embezzlement. I exhaled a shaky breath. Can I take it back? Carter leaned back in his leather chair, steepling his fingers. Matthew, you don't just take it back. You drop a nuclear bomb on them. I can file an immediate injunction to freeze their access to the property. I can revoke the power of attorney effective immediately. We will redirect all future rent to a secure account in your name. And then, we sue them for every single penny of back rent they stole over the last decade. If they can't pay it, the IRS will seize their personal assets to cover the tax lien they caused. Who helped them do this? I asked. My dad isn't smart enough to set up an LLC to shield liability while hiding behind a POA. Carter tapped a piece of paper. The LLC was registered by a CPA named Dylan. Your uncle, I presume? He structured this whole thing. He's complicit. Everything made sense now. The network of lies, the sudden wealth, the desperate phone call to keep me quiet. Draft the papers, Carter, I said, my voice steady and resolute. Draft the revocation. Draft the eviction warnings for them to stay off the property. Draft the demand letters for the stolen money. I want it all legally binding and ready to serve. Carter finally smiled. It was a sharp, dangerous smile. Consider it done. Where do you want to serve them? I can send a process server to their house. I looked out the window at the bustling city below. It was mid-December. The holidays were approaching. My mother loved the holidays. She loved the performance of a perfect family. No, I said quietly. Don't send a server. Put the documents in a manila envelope. I'll deliver them myself. On Christmas. Which brings us back to that Christmas Eve. The night of the missing family portrait. After seeing my face meticulously erased from the wall, I sat at the dining room table, surrounded by the people who shared my DNA but nothing else. The table was set with fine china and crystal glasses. A massive roasted turkey sat in the center. It was a masterclass in visual perfection and a complete black hole of actual affection. So, Elijah, my dad said, cutting into a piece of white meat, tell Matthew about the big news at the agency. A promotion, right? Elijah swirled his wine glass, looking incredibly pleased with himself. Oh, it's nothing major. Just got bumped up to senior creative director. The salary increase is nice, but really it's about the creative control, you know? I knew for a fact his agency was a struggling startup that had less than 10 employees, and his promotion was likely just a title change because half the staff had quit. But my mom gasped like he had just won a Nobel Prize. We are so incredibly proud of you, sweetie, she beamed, reaching over to squeeze his hand. You've always had such a brilliant eye. She turned to me, her smile dropping just a fraction. And how are things at the warehouse, Matthew? Still moving boxes. I manage the regional logistics for the Eastern Seaboard, Mom, I said flatly, taking a bite of my food. And yes, things are fine. That's nice, dear, she said dismissively, already turning her attention back to Elijah. After dinner, we moved to the living room to exchange a few early gifts. My dad handed Elijah a sleek, rectangular box. Elijah tore the paper off to reveal the keys to a brand new, luxury ski cabin rental for a week in Aspen. Fully paid for. You've been working so hard, son, my dad said, clapping him on the shoulder. You deserve a break. Then, my mom handed me a small, awkwardly wrapped square. I unwrapped it. It was a ceramic coffee mug. Printed on the side, in cheap, peeling letters, were the words, somebody's favorite daughter. The room went dead silent. Elijah snorted, trying to hold back a laugh. My mom's face flushed. Oh my goodness, Matthew. I am so sorry. The girl at the boutique must have put the wrong mug in the box. I bought you one that said, World's Best Worker. I can return it on Monday. Don't worry about it, Mom, I said, setting the insulting mug down on the glass coffee table. It's perfect. Really captures the essence of how well you know me. My dad frowned, clearly not liking my tone. Don't be ungrateful, Matthew. Your mother spent all day cooking. I didn't argue. I didn't yell. I just looked up at the giant family portrait over the fireplace, the portrait of 3 people. The real family. I was just the ghost haunting their dining room, the ATM machine they kept locked in the basement. "I'm tired," I said, standing up. "I'm going to head to bed. Merry Christmas." My mother had put me in the guest room at the end of the hall. It used to be my bedroom, but they had stripped it of any personality years ago. Now it was just a sterile room with beige walls, a lumpy mattress, and a closet full of my mother's out-of-season coats. I closed the door behind me and locked it. The house was settling. I could hear the faint sound of the television playing a holiday movie downstairs. I could hear Elijah laughing at a joke my dad made. They were happy. They were completely, utterly at peace in their castle built on my stolen foundation. I walked over to my duffel bag and pulled out the manila envelope Carter had given me. Felt heavy. Felt like holding a loaded weapon. I sat on the edge of the squeaky bed, running my fingers over the smooth paper. Inside this envelope were the legal documents that would freeze their bank accounts. Inside were the letters demanding hundreds of thousands of dollars in restitution. Inside was the court order revoking their power of attorney, officially cutting the lifeline of their wealth. For a brief, fleeting second, a wave of doubt washed over me. These were my parents, the people who raised me. If I handed them this envelope tomorrow, there was no going back. It would be a declaration of absolute war. It would shatter our family permanently. But then I thought about the Porsche. I thought about the grueling nights working 3 jobs while my dad told me they were broke. I thought about the tax lien from the IRS that almost destroyed my future. And finally, I thought about the photograph above the fireplace. They had already shattered the family. They had cut me out a long time ago. All I was doing tomorrow was making it official. I placed the envelope gently on the nightstand. I turned off the cheap bedside lamp and lay back in the dark. Outside the window, a heavy snow had started to fall, burying the streets in a cold, silent blanket. I closed my eyes, and for the first time in my entire life under this roof, I slept peacefully, because I knew that when the sun came up, the storm was finally going to break, and I was going to be the one bringing the thunder. Christmas morning arrived with bright sunlight reflecting off the fresh snow outside. I woke up in the cold guest room, my mind completely clear. I did not feel anxious. I did not feel afraid. I got dressed, grabbed the thick manila envelope from the nightstand, and walked downstairs. The living room was a sea of torn, expensive wrapping paper and shiny ribbons. The smell of freshly baked cinnamon rolls wafted from the kitchen, mingling with the scent of the pine tree. My dad was sitting in his leather recliner, sipping black coffee. My mom was kneeling by the tree, wearing matching silk pajamas. Elijah was already busy unboxing his latest haul. He had a stack of designer clothes, a new laptop, and a very expensive espresso machine. "Morning, Matthew," my dad said casually, not looking up from his tablet. "Grab a cinnamon roll. We saved you one." I did not go to the kitchen. I walked straight into the center of the living room. I stood right in front of the marble coffee table. I looked up at the giant family portrait over the fireplace one last time. The 3 of them smiling, my space completely erased. Then I looked down at my actual family. I pulled the envelope from my pocket and dropped it onto the center of the marble table. It made a heavy, definitive smack. Elijah looked up from his new laptop. "What's that? Did you actually buy us a real present this year?" My dad chuckled, setting his tablet down. He leaned forward, expecting to find a gift card to a steakhouse or maybe some concert tickets. "You didn't have to do that, son. We know money is tight for you." I crossed my arms. "Open it." My mom smiled warmly. She reached out with her perfectly manicured hands and slid the envelope toward her. She undid the metal clasp and pulled out the thick stack of legal documents. I watched her eyes scan the top page. It was a formal, legally binding notice of revocation of power of attorney. Right below that was a cease and desist order. And behind that was the civil lawsuit draft demanding immediate restitution for 10 years of stolen rental income. At first, her brain could not process what she was looking at. She blinked rapidly. Her smile faltered. turning into a confused, tight line. She read the bold print at the top of the page again. Then her eyes darted to the second page. The property address in Old Briar. The mention of the LLC registered by Uncle Dylan. The exact dollar amounts of the monthly rent they had been illegally funneling into their personal checking accounts. Her hands started to shake. The heavy legal paper rattled against her diamond rings. "Sarah?" my dad asked, noticing the sudden shift in the room's energy. "What is it?" My mom could not speak. Her face went entirely pale. All the color drained from her cheeks, leaving her looking completely hollow. The paper slipped from her fingers and fluttered back onto the coffee table. My dad grabbed the documents. He adjusted his reading glasses and read the first paragraph. I watched the arrogant, confident patriarch of the family completely disintegrate in real time. His jaw went slack. The tablet slid off his lap and clattered onto the hardwood floor. "Matthew," my dad whispered. His voice was completely unrecognizable. It was a dry, raspy wheeze. "Where did you get this?" "I got it from public records, Dad," I said, my voice steady and cold. "I got it from the county clerk. I got it from the tenant you just raised the rent on last month. And I got it from my lawyer, who is fully prepared to take everything you own." The holiday music playing softly on the stereo suddenly felt incredibly loud. The perfect Christmas morning was dead. The bomb had detonated, and I was standing right in the blast zone, completely unharmed. "This is insane," my dad finally stammered. He threw the papers back onto the table like they were covered in acid. He stood up, trying to physically dominate the space, puffing his chest out. "This is some kind of sick joke. We managed that estate legally. You signed the paperwork." "I signed a power of attorney," I shot back, taking a step forward. I did not shrink down. I met his eyes with absolute fury. "I signed a document giving you the right to manage the property on my behalf. I did not sign a document giving you permission to steal my inheritance. I did not sign a document allowing you to route my rental income into your personal bank accounts to fund your vacations." My mom burst into tears, real ugly tears. She covered her face with her hands. "Matthew, please, you don't understand. We were protecting you. You were 18 years old. You didn't know how to handle real estate. You would have squandered it." "Protected me?" I laughed. It was a harsh, bitter sound. "You protected me by letting the IRS slap a massive tax lien on my social security number because you were too busy buying designer bags to pay the property taxes in my name? You protected me by telling me you were completely broke when I begged you for help with college tuition." I pointed a finger at the white Porsche sitting in the driveway outside the window. "You told me to work 3 jobs. You watched me eat instant noodles and sleep on a friend's couch. And 2 months later, you bought him a luxury sports car with my money. You call that protection? I call it grand theft." "Don't you dare speak to your mother that way," my dad roared. His face was bright red now. The veins in his neck were bulging. He was losing control, and he knew it. "We put a roof over your head for 18 years. We fed you. You owed us. That house was the only way we could keep this family afloat." "Keep this family afloat?" I echoed. "You mean keep up the illusion. You wanted the country club membership. You wanted the first-class flights to Tuscany. You used my grandfather's dying gift to build a fake upper-class lifestyle, and you treated me like a burden the entire time." My dad pointed a trembling finger at me. "If you file this lawsuit, you will destroy this family. You will ruin us financially. Is that what you want? You want to see your own parents out on the street. You ruined yourselves," I stated simply. "I am just turning the lights on. The gig is up, Dad. The LLC Uncle Dylan set up to shield you is useless because you commingled the funds. You broke every fiduciary law on the books. My lawyer already filed the injunction. As of this morning, your access to the Old Briar property is legally frozen. The tenants have been served with notices to redirect all payments to a trust in my name. You don't have a dime of my money anymore." My mom wailed, sinking onto the sofa. "Matthew, please, we can work this out. We can give you a cut. We can make you a partner in the LLC. I own the whole thing, Mom, I said, shaking my head at her absolute delusion. There is no partnership. You are thieves. And I am your landlord kicking you out. The room fell silent again, save for my mother's sobbing. They had no cards left to play. Their authority was gone. Their wealth was gone. The fake empire of sand they had built over the last 10 years was washing away right in front of their eyes. But there was one person in the room who still had not fully grasped the reality of the situation. Elijah. He had been sitting on the floor, surrounded by his expensive gifts, staring at us with wide, panicked eyes. And then, he opened his mouth and made the biggest mistake of his life. Elijah scrambled to his feet. He looked from the legal documents to my dad, and then finally glared at me. His face was twisted with that familiar, entitled rage he always got when someone told him no. You can't do this, Matt, Elijah snapped, stepping between me and our parents. You don't even need that money. You have a good job. You live in a cheap apartment. You like living like that. We actually need this income to maintain our standard of living. I stared at him, genuinely amazed by his sheer audacity. You think you have a right to my money because you like expensive things? It's family money, Elijah yelled, his voice cracking. Dad told me about the setup 2 years ago. He said Grandpa left the house, but you didn't care about it. He said you were fine on your own and that the rental income was going to support my art career. You can't just take back my funding. The room went dead silent. Even my mother stopped crying. I looked at my dad. He squeezed his eyes shut and ran a hand over his face. He knew Elijah had just handed me the final nail for their coffin. You knew, I said softly, stepping closer to my brother. For 2 years, you knew that the money paying your rent, funding your vacations, and buying your clothes was stolen from me. And you didn't say a single word. Elijah swallowed hard, suddenly realizing his mistake. He took a step back. I thought you knew. I thought it was an arrangement. You drove a Porsche bought with my stolen inheritance while I was working night shifts, I said, my voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. You knew exactly what was happening. You are just as guilty as they are. I turned away from him and looked at my parents. They looked small, pathetic. The towering, intimidating figures of my childhood were completely gone, replaced by 2 desperate criminals caught red-handed. Carter is going to audit every single bank account you own, I said clearly, making sure they heard every word. He is going to track every dollar you pulled out of Old Briar. The demand letter gives you 30 days to pay back the last 10 years of stolen rent. If you can't pay it, the court will place a lien on this house. They will take your cars. They will take your retirement accounts. And if you try to fight me on this, I will take these documents to the district attorney and press criminal charges for fraud. My dad slumped down into his chair, utterly defeated. I walked over to the coat rack and pulled my heavy winter jacket over my shoulders. I zipped it up slowly. I did not feel a single ounce of guilt. I felt light. I felt like a massive, crushing weight had finally been lifted off my chest. If you ever contact me again without going through my lawyer, I said, putting my hand on the front doorknob, I will call the police. I opened the door. The crisp, freezing winter air hit my face. Felt amazing. I stepped out onto the porch, leaving the door wide open behind me. I walked down the driveway, past Elijah's shiny white Porsche, got into my used sedan, and drove away. I didn't look back in the rearview mirror. Not even once. This is the moment that changes everything. The moment I finally took back control of my life. Thank you so much for your patience and for staying with me until now. You've been amazing. Please give this video a like and comment 1 below to let me know you've made it this far. Not only does this help more people find this story, but it also lets me know that my experiences truly mean something to someone. Your support is my greatest motivation to keep sharing the rest of this journey. The silence in my apartment over the next few weeks was absolute heaven. I didn't have to pretend anymore. I didn't have to rehearse conversations in my head before visiting them. I was free. But my phone, on the other hand, was an absolute war zone. They did not respect my boundary. Criminals rarely do when they are backed into a corner. The barrage of messages started 2 days after Christmas. First, it was my mother. She weaponized her emotions like a seasoned general. Her voicemails would start with a soft, trembling sigh. "Matthew, sweetie. It's Mom. I can't sleep. I haven't eaten in days. My heart is physically breaking. Please, you have to talk to us. We are your family. I carried you for 9 months. You can't just throw us away over money. Money isn't everything. Please call me back." I listened to it once, felt absolutely nothing, and forwarded the audio file directly to Carter's email. When the guilt trips didn't work, the tactics changed. Next came the anger from my dad. His texts were long, frantic paragraphs full of capitalization and spelling errors. "You are destroying this family. You have no idea how the real world works. I kept a roof over your head. You owe me. If you don't call off those lawyers by Friday, I am countersuing for the cost of raising you. You are an ungrateful son." I screenshotted the threats, forwarded to Carter. Then came the panicked, pathetic messages from Elijah. His reality was crumbling the fastest. "Bro, please. The bank sent me a repossession notice for the car. I don't have the cash to make the payment this month. Can you just unlock the account for 1 more week? Just so I can figure things out? We are brothers. Don't do this to me. Delete. Block." The funniest attempt came from Uncle Dylan, the smart guy who orchestrated the whole LLC scam. He tried to call me from his office line, playing the role of the wise, neutral mediator. "Matthew, my boy, let's not get the courts involved. Lawyers just drain everyone's pockets. Let Uncle Dylan sit down with you and your dad, and we can restructure the LLC so you get a fair percentage moving forward. Keep it in the family, right?" I didn't block Dylan. I had Carter send a formal letter directly to his accounting firm, threatening to report him to the state licensing board for aiding and abetting fiduciary fraud. Uncle Dylan never called me again. I maintained absolute, ironclad discipline. I did not respond to a single text. I did not answer a single call. I knew that the moment I engaged, I would give them power. My silence was a fortress they could not breach. They were screaming into a void, and the echo of their own panic was starting to deafen them. They had spent 10 years treating me like I was invisible. Now I was giving them exactly what they always wanted. I disappeared. The financial dominoes did not just fall. They collapsed violently. When you build a lifestyle that requires $10,000 of stolen rental income every single month to stay afloat, cutting that cord is like pulling the plug on a life support machine. They had zero savings. Every dime they stole had been spent on maintaining their upper-class illusion. I didn't have to go looking for information. The gossip in our extended family network was too juicy to contain, and pieces of it constantly drifted back to me through mutual acquaintances. By February, the bank officially seized Elijah's white Porsche. He couldn't make the payments without my grandfather's money. His promotion at the agency turned out to be worthless because the startup folded. Without his luxury car and his endless cash flow to buy drinks for his friends, his social circle abandoned him. He had to break the lease on his overpriced downtown apartment and move back into the basement of my parents' house. The golden child was officially grounded. My parents fared even worse. Carter's audit was ruthless. He proved they had embezzled nearly $1 million over the decade. To settle the civil suit and avoid me pressing criminal charges, my parents had to liquidate everything. They had to sell their massive house, the house with the giant edited family portrait. They downsized to a cramped, 2-bedroom condo on the unfashionable side of town. But even that wasn't enough to cover their debts. My dad, the proud patriarch who used to lecture me about hard work while stealing my checks, had to swallow his massive pride. I heard from a former neighbor that he was making cold calls, begging his old clients for consulting work. Nobody was biting. Word gets around in wealthy circles when you lose your house. My mom had to get a job. For the first time in 30 years, she had to clock in. She got a part-time retail gig at a high-end clothing boutique downtown. The very same boutique where she used to drop thousands of dollars on designer clothes. Now she was steaming garments and ringing up yoga pants for the women she used to play tennis with. The poetic justice of it all was almost cinematic. They spent their entire lives obsessing over appearances. They sacrificed their own son to maintain a fake image of wealth and success. And in the end, their greed stripped them of the only thing they actually cared about, their status. They were totally exposed. The fake empire was gone, leaving nothing but three bitter, miserable people trapped in a small condo, blaming each other for their ruin. Meanwhile, my life was just beginning. Carter successfully transferred all the management rights back to my name. I paid off the IRS tax lien in full using the first settlement check from my parents' liquidated assets. My credit score rebounded. And for the first time in my life, I truly owned my future. I didn't use the money to buy a sports car. I didn't book a trip to Tuscany. I used the money to finally build a real home. 1 year later, the dust had finally settled. I didn't buy that small condo I had been looking at. Instead, I moved into the vacant top-floor unit of the triplex in Old Briar. My grandfather's house. My house. Moving in was an incredibly emotional experience. The space was beautiful, with high vaulted ceilings and original hardwood floors. But it had been neglected by my parents. They only cared about collecting the rent, never about maintaining the soul of the building. I didn't hire a fancy contracting firm to fix it up. I did it myself. Every weekend after work, I put on old clothes, turned on some music, and got to work. I sanded down the scuffed hardwood floors until my hands were blistered. I patched the holes in the drywall. I painted the living room a warm, inviting shade of blue. Every stroke of the paintbrush felt like therapy. I was literally wiping away the decay they had left behind and pouring my own sweat and love into the foundation. I was reclaiming my history. I also took over the management of the tenants. I knocked on Mrs. Higgins' door on my first official day as the active landlord. She looked nervous when she opened the door, probably expecting another rent hike. I handed her a new lease agreement. "Mrs. Higgins, I know the last management company raised your rent pretty aggressively. I've reviewed the market rates, and I'm dropping your rent by $400 a month, effective immediately. And I scheduled a plumber to come fix your guest bathroom tomorrow morning." She looked at the paper, then looked up at me, tears welling in her kind eyes. "Matthew, you have no idea what this means to me. Thank you." A few days later, I found a plate of warm, homemade chocolate chip cookies sitting on my welcome mat with a handwritten thank you note. It was a small gesture, but it meant the world to me. It showed me that this building didn't have to be a symbol of greed and theft. It could be a community. It could be a place of mutual respect. For the first time in 29 years, I woke up in a place where I didn't feel like an intruder. I didn't have to walk on eggshells. I could drink coffee on the front porch and listen to the birds. I could leave my shoes by the door. I had finally found what I had been looking for my entire life. I was home, but toxic people have a very hard time letting go of their favorite victims. It was a Tuesday evening in late October. I was walking up the steps to my porch, holding a bag of groceries, when I saw a plain white envelope wedged into the crack of my front door. It didn't have a stamp. It didn't have a return address. But the cursive handwriting on the front spelling out Matthew made my stomach drop for a split second. It was my mother's handwriting. She must have driven over here while I was at work and slipped it into the door. I unlocked the door, set my groceries on the kitchen counter, and stared at the envelope. A year ago, a letter from her would have sent me into a spiral of anxiety. I would have agonized over opening it. But now, I just felt a mild sense of exhaustion. I tore open the flap and pulled out the single sheet of lined paper. "My dearest Matthew," the letter began, "I know you are angry, but it has been a year, and the silence is destroying my health. Your father's blood pressure is dangerously high. Elijah is depressed. We are struggling so much in this new place. We miss you. You made your point and you won. But family is forever. We can put the money issues behind us and start over. Please, let's heal. Give your mother a second chance. I love you." I read it twice, not because I was moved, but because I was fascinated by the sheer psychological gymnastics on display. It was a masterclass in manipulation. Notice what was missing? There was no apology. Not a single word acknowledging that they committed fraud. Not a single admission of guilt for stealing my inheritance, lying to my face, or treating me like a second-class citizen. She framed it as if we just had a silly disagreement over money issues. She framed herself as the victim whose health was failing because I was being stubborn. She wanted me to feel guilty so I would come back and play my designated role. The emotional punching bag who fixes their problems. I didn't feel angry. I didn't feel the urge to call her and scream. I just felt a profound sense of pity. They were never going to change. They were incapable of genuine self-reflection. I walked over to the fireplace I had restored in my living room. I struck a match, lit a small fire, and watched the flames catch the dry wood. I held the letter by the corner and lowered it into the fire. The paper curled, turned black, and dissolved into ash. The smoke drifted up the chimney and disappeared into the night sky. That was the last time my mother ever tried to contact me. The bridge wasn't just burned. The ashes were scattered. I was completely, beautifully free. The holidays rolled around again. My first Christmas in my own house. I didn't spend it alone in a sterile guest room. I hosted dinner. I invited Chloe, the friend who helped me uncover the truth. I invited Luke, the buddy who let me sleep on his couch when my parents refused to help with my college tuition. I cooked a massive prime rib, we drank good wine, and the house was filled with loud, genuine laughter. Sitting by my feet were 2 golden retriever mixes I had adopted from the local shelter. They were chaotic, happy, and fiercely loyal. After dinner, Chloe walked over to the fireplace. She picked up a framed photograph resting on the mantel. "I love this picture," she smiled, tapping the glass. I walked over and stood next to her. It was a picture we took on Thanksgiving. It was me, Chloe, Luke, and the 2 dogs sitting on my front porch. Everyone was smiling. Everyone was leaning in toward each other. "Yeah," I said quietly, looking at the frame. "Me too. Nobody had to be cropped out of this one." A few weeks later, I was at a hardware store picking up some salt for the icy driveway when I ran into Wyatt, the cousin who had betrayed me. He looked older, tired. He was standing in the checkout line holding a cheap snow shovel. He saw me and froze. He looked incredibly uncomfortable, shifting his weight from foot to foot. "Hey, Matt," he mumbled, refusing to make eye contact. "Long time." "Hey, Wyatt," I said casually, tossing a bag of salt into my cart. He hesitated, then leaned in a little. "I heard what happened with your folks. Man, things are bad for them. Aunt Sarah is working retail. Elijah is basically broke. Have you talked to them at all?" He was fishing for gossip. He wanted to know if the ice was thawing so he could report back to the family network. I looked him dead in the eye. I didn't scowl. I smiled. A genuine, relaxed smile. "I haven't talked to them," I said, "and I never will. But you can tell them I said hi." Wyatt swallowed hard and nodded quickly, grabbing his shovel and hurrying out the door. He finally understood. I wasn't holding a grudge. I had completely moved on. They were nothing more than strangers I used to know. I paid for my salt, loaded it into my car, and drove back to Old Briar. The winter sun was setting, casting a warm golden glow over the brick exterior of my house. I pulled into the driveway, turned off the engine, and just sat there for a moment, listening to the quiet. I had survived them. I had fought the hardest battle of my life against the people who were supposed to protect me, and I had won. Not just the lawsuit. I had won my peace of mind. When I look back on everything, I realize the greatest gift my grandfather left me wasn't the property in Old Briar. It wasn't the brick walls, the hardwood floors, or the monthly rental income. The greatest gift he left me was the truth. The inheritance was just the catalyst. It was the flashlight that illuminated the dark, toxic reality of my family. For 28 years, I thought I was the problem. I thought I wasn't smart enough, charismatic enough, or successful enough to earn their love. I thought Elijah was just better than me. But the money revealed their true character. They didn't love Elijah more. They loved the reflection of themselves they saw in him. And they didn't hate me, They just found me useful. I was a tool to be used and discarded. We are taught from a very young age that blood is thicker than water. We are conditioned to believe that we owe our parents our undying loyalty simply because they gave us life. But respect is a two-way street. Love should not be a transactional arrangement. If someone is actively destroying your mental health, stealing your peace, or manipulating your reality, you are allowed to walk away. It doesn't matter if they share your last name. It doesn't matter if they sat at your dinner table for 20 years. You are allowed to protect yourself. Cutting out toxic family members isn't an act of cruelty. It is the ultimate act of self-preservation. Sometimes, the strongest, bravest thing you can possibly do is pack your bags, walk out the front door, and never look back. Today it's Christmas Eve again. I'm sitting in my living room. The fire is crackling. My dogs are asleep on the rug. The house is quiet, warm, and entirely mine. There are no fake smiles. There are no passive-aggressive comments about my clothes or my job. There is only peace. I built a life I don't need a vacation from, and I surrounded myself with a family I chose. Thank you for sticking around and listening to my story. It wasn't an easy one to tell, but it's one I know I needed to share. I hope this resonated with you in some way. Family dynamics can be incredibly complicated, and sometimes the hardest wounds to heal are the ones inflicted by the people closest to us. Have you ever found yourself in a similar situation? Have you ever had to walk away from someone you loved in order to protect yourself? I read every single comment, and I would love to hear your experiences down below. If you have made it all the way to this exact moment in the video, you are part of an exclusive group. I want you to go down to the comments and type the letter W. W stands for winner. It lets me know that you are part of the 1% club, the amazing people who watch these stories until the very last second. You guys are the reason I keep making these videos. If my story helped you or entertained you, please hit that like button and click follow so we can stay connected. I have a lot more stories to share with you. Until next time, stay strong, protect your peace, and never let anyone erase you from your own life.